With just 5 weeks left to play in the regular season, what teams have the best chance to get to Atlanta and play for an SEC title game? Locked On SEC starts right now.
You are Locked On SEC, your daily podcast on the Southeastern Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And what's up, everybody? Welcome to Locked On SEC. It's great to have you guys along on today's show. Connor O'Gara of Saturday Down South is going to join us to talk about all the different scenarios of the teams remaining in the SEC championship game hunt and what they need to do down the stretch of the season. I'm Chris Gordy. Thanks for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Shout out to Everydayers. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 of bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com today to get started. All right, first, we're going to go around the conference. We got news and stuff going on, so let's dive right into it.
Boots out to the right. Takes the handoff. What a catch!
Around the conference.
And we start over at Ole Miss as Lane Kiffin met with reporters in Oxford on Monday, and it came moments after the TV schedule was announced for Week 11, and this will be next week when Lane Kiffin's team will get ready for Georgia, and they will play in that 2:30 Central window on November 9th, not at night. LSU Alabama gets the night game in Baton Rouge, 6:30 Central on ABC. Upon learning of it, Lane Kiffin said, quote, "LSU gets to play at night again, I guess? Shocker." So that's 2 for 2 for them. It is an advantage. I feel bad for our fans to not have one night conference game. It's really unfortunate for them. So whatever. It's just really disappointing. But it is what it is. Only thing I'll say to that, Lane, is look, it's a big game. Obviously, Ole Miss and Georgia, but LSU Alabama has gotten the night treatment for a long time here on CBS. Throughout the years, CBS always had they could flex out that one weekend where they could do the afternoon game and a night game. And more often than not, they always put Alabama, LSU, flex that out to the night game because it draws ratings. It's one of the biggest matchups. Now, does LSU always beat Alabama? No, but more often than not, those games are uber competitive, and LSU has gotten Bama a couple times, and the ratings are always through the roof. There's a reason why, doing away with the West, East and the West, in the SEC, the conference still wanted to protect that LSU-Alabama matchup. It's a great rivalry. They want to keep them together. So I get Lane's displeasure, but look, if they'd scheduled, can't do much about the SEC schedule, but could have certainly done something about scheduling a tougher non-conference game that could have been played at night. But remaining schedule for Ole Miss, no night games. They'll be at Arkansas this Saturday, home for Georgia, Saturday, November 9th in the afternoon. November 23rd, they're at Florida at 12 Eastern. And then they'll finish with the Egg Bowl on November 29th at home, a 2:30 Central kick. So no night games. The Rebels will not have a single night game in the SEC this season at home. But again, if maybe they had some more sexy home matchups, it's kind of how the schedule happened for Ole Miss. I do think when you look at the schedule for next year, right, you're going to flip home and away. So we'll keep the same schedule. So next year, Ole Miss will have home games against South Carolina, LSU, Arkansas, and Florida. Good chance that LSU game is probably going to be a night game next year at Vaughn Hemingway. We will see. All right, other news going on around the conference. Over at Texas A&M, Mike Elko saying his post-game comments about running, quote, a real program were not directed at Jimbo Fisher. He said after the game on Saturday night, quote, "This is a real program. It's not fake. It's not a politician running this program, talking fast and BSing everybody." Elko on Monday said, look, this is comical. I actually have to do this, but it's necessary. In the post-game, I was kind of asked to give a synopsis on how we sell culture to our program. You guys give me multiple opportunities in 9 months to take shots at people, and I've never done it. I have nothing but respect for Coach Fisher. I've said nothing but positive things about Coach Fisher. I'm the head coach at A&M because of Coach Fisher. Yeah, no doubt, because he got fired. That's why you're the head coach at Texas A&M. Look, I'll say, like, if he just was saying Saturday night about, this is a real program, we're building something here, that's fine. But when you say, I'm not a politician running this program, talking fast and BSing everybody, that's exactly what Jimbo Fisher did at Texas A&M. I talked to multiple people that would go to A&M fundraiser events, and they literally described Jimbo as, yeah, he would talk real fast like an auctioneer, BS us, lie to us, sell us on, oh, this is going to be a championship program, and you'd leave that event like, yeah, let me write the check. How much do I have to write? This is going to be awesome. That's exactly what Jimbo Fisher did. So I think it's more ridiculous than Mike Elko has to backtrack it. Dude, put your name on it. Say it with your chest. Say, hell yeah, let's take a shot at Jimbo Fisher. He underachieved at this program. I'm going to take us to new heights. Man, where are the Steve Spurriers back in the day? They would have stood with their chest out, not come back and go, oh, I wasn't trying to offend anybody. Oh, really? You weren't trying to offend the fired head coach who made $77 million in a buyout? Who cares? He's on a beach in Destin enjoying pina coladas. I'm sure Jimbo Fisher doesn't really care if you took a shot at him. Speaking of A&M's big win over LSU, Brian Kelly joined Paul Feinbaum on Monday, talked about what went wrong in backup quarterback Marcel Reed coming in to beat them in the second half. Kelly said, we're now having to handle option responsibilities. We weren't doing that. We were rushing the quarterback. We were more of a traditional defensive structure and couldn't adjust. So they will have to make those adjustments moving forward with Jalen Milroe and Alabama coming in here to Baton Rouge next week. Over at Auburn, Hugh Freeze getting ready for their big game against Vanderbilt and having to deal with Diego Pavia yet again. Of course, we remember last year, Jordan-Hare Stadium, Diego Pavia and New Mexico State came into Auburn and beat Auburn 31-10. But back in 2022, when Hugh Freeze was at Liberty, New Mexico State blew out Liberty 49-14. So Diego Pavia is 2-0 against Hugh Freeze coach teams. And Hugh Freeze said on Monday, I'm sick of seeing that quarterback. So we'll see if Diego can keep that magic going at Vanderbilt against Auburn this weekend. One other note, Hugh Freeze said, one of the scariest things about their offense is you're basically playing Navy. He said it doesn't look just like Navy, but Alabama had 44 real snaps of offensive football against them. Last year when we played them, first time we touched the ball in the first quarter, I believe it was with 5 minutes left. It's uncomfortable. So it's death by 1,000, whatever that saying is. That's what Vanderbilt and Diego Pavia do to you. We'll see if Auburn is up for the challenge. Over at Arkansas, Sam Pittman talking with reporters on Monday. Said star running back Jaquindon Jackson is considered doubtful for Saturday's game this weekend. Razorbacks did well in the run game against Mississippi State this past weekend with true freshman Braylon Russell handling the workload. One other note, Sam Pittman confirming the removal of two tight ends from the team, Tyrus Washington and Varkey's Gums, removed from the team. Razorbacks and Ole Miss face off at 11 a.m. Central on ESPN on Saturday. In the SEC, they announced their Week 9 SEC Players of the Week, and a lot of guys who were on our winners and losers or winners list on Monday on the show. Offense, Jarquez Hunter from Auburn and Taylon Green from Arkansas. Defensive Player of the Week, Centarian Perkins at Ole Miss. Michael Taff, the safety at Texas. Special teams was A&M punter Tyler White. O-lineman of the week, Tyler Booker at Alabama. Xavier Miller at Auburn. D-lineman of the week, Keldrick Falk at Auburn. And your freshman of the week, Braylon Russell, the Arkansas running back. And Marcel Reed, the A&M quarterback. And by the way, Jarquez Hunter also named the Reese's Senior Bowl Offensive Player of the Week. So shout out to him. And there you have it. You are all caught up on the latest news going on around the conference. Coming up next, we are going to talk with our buddy Connor O'Gara, get his thoughts on this race for the SEC championship with no divisions anymore, no East or West. How is this thing all shaken up, and what do teams have to do down the stretch to get to Atlanta? Do you even want to get to Atlanta? We'll talk about that with Connor O'Gara coming up here in just a second. But first, I want to remind you guys, today's episode is presented to our friends over at Roy, and it is time for our Roy Player of the Week. So far this season, we've pulled over $20,000 to support players on the Roy app. Micro deposits lead to massive change, and with the Roy app, you can direct your support to the athletes you love, ensuring that all funds go to the specific player you choose. Unlike collectives, you know exactly where your support is going, and you even receive exclusive content like personal videos and updates following the season. The best part, it is risk-free. If the athlete transfers or doesn't deliver the content, you get your money back. And this week, we are supporting Auburn running back Jarquez Hunter. We pitched in $100. Love for you to join us. Even $10 makes a difference. Let's show Jarquez Hunter the love and keep him connected to your school. Remember, pay today, celebrate tomorrow. Your support sets your team up for success. Plus, don't miss out on Roy's exciting giveaway. Win 2 tickets to a game in November. Just download the Roy app, create an account, enter our referral code LOCKEDON, and you'll be entered to win. If you're already on Roy, any contribution to an athlete's campaign also gets you entered automatically. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited. Download the Roy app now. Join the NIL game with no subscriptions and no fees. And be sure to check out on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Roy_return on you. For more info, it is Roy. Support the players and change the game. Run along here, Locked On SEC. One of our favorite guys. We haven't had him on here enough this season. Saw him at SEC Media Days, and he's a dad now. He's super busy, but we appreciate him taking some time to join us. He is Connor O'Gara of Saturday Down South. Connor, welcome in, man. It's crazy to think we've only got, some teams only have 4 games left on their schedule. I can't believe this season has flown by as quickly as it has.
I can't believe that we are 3.5 months removed from a certain Chris Gordy stepping up to the mic and once again showing why there is no better karaoke voice, at least among SEC media. There never has been one. There never will be another. You are the GOAT. And I think of the season in terms of that, because I truly look forward to SEC Media Days. It's great to be able to see you, to see so many people, your karaoke partner, John Neighbors, as well. But to think that we have flown through the season and already at this point, 3.5 months removed from SEC Media Days, in which I probably tossed a lot of those takes in the trash. Yeah, man, time's flying way too quickly.
Yeah, it's funny. When Ole Miss lost to LSU, I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. And then I realized my hot take before the season, I had Ole Miss in Atlanta. It's not dead yet. It's still alive, but it's on life support. And that's what kind of got me thinking. I said, you know what? There's so many people that have been commenting and sending me emails and DMs and all this about, hey, so what's my team got to do? I said, you know what? We'll kind of lay this out. So I thought Connor would kind of just jump into this and look at the SEC standings as of right now. This is as of this moment, and this is just the teams at the top of the Southeastern Conference and their record in conference play. Forget, non-conference and all that. And with Texas A&M beating LSU this past weekend, they are sitting at the top at 5-0. Georgia sits right behind them at 4-1. Texas, Tennessee, and LSU all at 3-1. And then we got Bama and Arkansas at 3-2. We'll get to the 2-2s in a minute, but as this stands right now, Connor, really Texas, Georgia, and Texas A&M probably in the best scenario, just in what lays ahead, right?
Yeah, I would think so, because obviously Tennessee is going to have that all-important game against Georgia, and if you lose that, you're sitting there with 2 losses in conference play, knowing that A&M is still undefeated in conference play as well. You're not winning the head-to-head with Georgia, so yeah, I mean, I think you're well within reason to kind of remove Tennessee from that discussion in terms of the teams with the most favorable paths. Now, obviously, if Tennessee beats Georgia, we're having a much different conversation. Georgia has that second loss. That all of a sudden changes things, and all of a sudden that path opens up for a lot of those teams. But it feels like we're heading for a scenario in which Texas and Texas A&M are playing for the first time in 13 years, and it is all important for the SEC championship race. I mean, the possibility of them facing each other in consecutive weeks is on the table with this. I mean, goodness gracious, we go that long, more than a decade without seeing these teams play. We could see them play in consecutive weeks. That is what is setting up right now with this race. And I kind of love it, man. I don't know about you, but I know a lot of people were kind of frustrated. I know more divisions. You're not going to have, this rivalry and that rivalry. And I fully get that. Those are the negatives of this. But what it's created is a November in which we're going to get all of these games in which fans are losing their collective minds over these playoff paths that would have already, or not these playoff paths, but these SEC paths that would have likely already been locked up if this were in the old format. And so that's kind of the beauty of the way that this is all shaping up.
Yeah, that's what's wild is, I mean, at this time, some years, the West is we already know who's going to win the West. We already know who's going to win the East. And with this thing wide open, it still is to be decided. And let's kind of take a look at the remaining games. And I want to start with A&M because they're in the driver's seat at 5-0. Danger spot for them this week, having to go at South Carolina. We'll see what A&M decides to do with their quarterback. I personally said maybe you play both. You don't want to get caught with Connor Wegman sitting back there like a statue against a defensive front from South Carolina. But with the New Mexico State game, they should win that one. But at Carolina, at Auburn, and then home for Texas, to me, look, as much as I want to say, oh, A&M can't do this, right? Like, clearly they're going to take a loss or two, but like, that's what's staring them in the face of going 8-0. It's crazy.
Yeah, there's still a world in which A&M could lose that game at South Carolina. I think they're going to start Marcel Reed. It's worth kind of remembering too, and this was lost in the shuffle of the broadcast a little bit. The two times in which I felt like a defense could truly game plan for Marcel Reed for a week and not what LSU endured on Saturday night at Kyle Field, those two instances, the A&M offense was kind of stuck in the mud, and that's why it felt like Mike Elko switched back to Connor Wigman and made that decision to say, look, this is the direction we need to go in. We have the last ranked passing offense in the SEC. So yes, as great as that performance was, I don't think it all of a sudden means that A&M is out of the woods and they're destined to be able to win at South Carolina. They're like a 3.5 point favorite only in that game because we know what South Carolina does extremely well, and that's get after the quarterback, and that defensive line has just been one of the best units in all of college football. So yeah, A&M though is still sitting there with a very favorable chance to win their next 3 games and go into Texas. Well, I should go into the Texas game with just 1 overall loss and undefeated in SEC play, with perhaps their ticket to Atlanta, a place they've never been to, already punched. I mean, that is wild. And that is something that I just don't think even the most diehard Texas A&M fan could have predicted in year 1 of the Mike Elko era.
Yeah, it's wild. But here we are, and I was even saying like 9-3. You pat him on the back and say, "Job well done, Michael."
Yep, a serious 9-3 probably. It makes it interesting for their playoff chances because a lot of that's going to come down to how does this play out for Mizzou? How does this play out for LSU? How strong do those wins look by season's end? Because as of right now, we're counting those both as top 10 wins. They beat them as top 10 teams. Mizzou looking not like a top 10 team, not breaking news by saying that. And then LSU, really unraveled down the stretch. And obviously they still have a couple of difficult games coming up here. But I think that that's going to be the big question for A&M is, do they have a playoff berth already locked in going into that Texas game? And are they playing a little bit with house money with potentially a playoff berth and an SEC championship berth already locked in?
Yeah. So let's look at it again. So A&M, look, worst case scenario, if they lose this weekend at South Carolina, things really get hairy because then it's like, oh God, then you have to beat Texas at the end of the year. You lose that one, 2 losses, you're probably not going to Atlanta. For Texas, they get Florida, they're at Arkansas, home for Kentucky, and at A&M. Again, not a tough draw. Florida's been playing better. Arkansas, man, Jekyll and Hyde. One week they look terrible against LSU. Then they look like world beaters against Mississippi State. We'll see what they look like. Kentucky's obviously floundering. So, I almost look at it as like Texas, what they have. And yes, things got a little bit sketched there with Vanderbilt at the end. But like, I don't know. Like, as far as how both teams are built, I almost feel more confident in Texas being able to run the table here than I do A&M.
I don't know. The difficult thing with Texas is there are 3 games in those remaining 4 in which I think they're going to have a difficult matchup. Now, I'm still a believer in Texas. I predicted Texas to go 12-0 in the preseason, and I still believe that Texas is in a favorable spot to make the college football playoff. But Florida's defensive line is really improved. TBD on what that looks like coming off of a Georgia game, which we expect to be extremely physical. And then understanding that you're going to have to go into Fayetteville. And I'm not going to bring up 2021, the loss that Steve Sarkisian suffered there, because both teams are drastically different. But at the same time, that's an Arkansas team that's already beat a top 5 team in their building. They beat Tennessee. And then obviously to close the year, we've said all these positive things about Texas A&M and them controlling their path to Atlanta. So Texas's path is still tricky, despite the fact that everybody talked about how favorable it was coming into this first year in the SEC, and they had the much more favorable draw compared to Oklahoma. But it's just a reminder, you got to be able to bring it every single week. Texas saw that against Vandy, a Vandy team that just kind of refused to go away in that game. And I do think that Texas has shown a little bit more vulnerability on that offensive line. To be determined if that's going to be their Achilles heel and if that's what prevents them from being able to win a national championship.
More with Connor O'Gara here in just a second, but I want to remind you guys today's episode is presented to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle your NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $100.50 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on college or the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your live bets, and that is FanDuel.com. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. And again, you can get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Talking with Connor O'Gara here of Saturday Down South and kind of looking at the remaining schedule and the top of the SEC and who's going to get to Atlanta. And Connor, as we look at the other ones, Georgia, I think obviously, look, they've started to look more like the Georgia team we thought, particularly a big win at Texas. But remaining game, obviously Florida is always a good rivalry game. The at Ole Miss and then home for Tennessee. Those are the two right there that's going to decide this thing. And the crazy thing is Georgia will literally be done with their SEC schedule with 2 games remaining. They'll play UMass and Georgia Tech. Really weird that they wrap up before everybody else. But to me, I mean, you agree kind of that at Ole Miss and then home for Tennessee are both kind of the 2 difficult stretches. And they lucked out a little bit. Georgia Ole Miss ends up the afternoon game on ABC and not a night game in Oxford. And Lane Kiffin, I know, is already complaining about it.
Oh yeah, as to be expected. That was a marquee game for Ole Miss coming into the year, and I think for Lane Kiffin, there's some frustration about where his program is at. The fact that they already have those 2 losses in SEC play, and I know we'll get to this, but I'm not banking on them to be able to get to Atlanta for the first time. I'm writing that situation off. And so I think he's frustrated that this game isn't bigger than what he was hoping for. Beat Kentucky at home, and then you don't have to worry about that. But I guess that's a different discussion for a different time. Georgia's got, 51 consecutive wins against non-Alabama teams?
Yeah.
Knowing that, it's hard to sit here and say, oh, I think that they can be caught off guard at Ole Miss, despite the fact that Ole Miss defensive line is legit. And if Georgia's offensive line isn't looking like a world beater, that's a trickier matchup than what probably some would think, given what we've seen from both of these programs recently. And then Tennessee, Josh Heupel hasn't gotten over that hump yet against Kirby Smart. Are we all of a sudden banking on this version of Tennessee, which all of a sudden has an extremely one-dimensional offense? Are we banking on this version of Tennessee going into Athens and winning that football game? I'm not. So Georgia's path to Atlanta still looks favorable, and especially knowing that the team that they would not have the head-to-head advantage against, Alabama, already has those 2 conference losses. So that's kind of working in their favor in a way that's not necessarily for Texas.
Speaking of Tennessee, you mentioned them. They still have 4 conference games to play. They will play Kentucky at home this weekend. Should take care of that one. They're going to wear the black and orange for Halloween. Then it'll be Mississippi State, at Georgia, then home for UTEP, and at Vandy, which at Vandy, we can't just pencil in a W anymore. That's a tough game these days. But again, it's for Tennessee's sake, really, it's going to come down to that game at Georgia. If they lose, if they can find a way to win that one, their hopes for Atlanta are still alive.
Yeah, that's everything. And then, just don't sleep on Diego Pavia senior night. I'm just saying, like that matchup, even for that loaded Tennessee defense, which has just been so much better than I could have ever imagined. Don't sleep on the difficulty of that matchup with the things that Vandy has been able to do this season. But yeah, it's all going to come down to that. And you wouldn't have it any other way if you're Tennessee. I think the question for them moving forward is, can they withstand a Georgia loss and get to the college football playoff at 10-2 without playing in the SEC championship? I think that's the thing that Vols fans are very intrigued to see, because some of that is going to depend on weird things like, how does Arkansas look down the stretch? How bad are we viewing that loss? Like, what if Arkansas implodes and this is a 5-7 Arkansas team at season's end, and we're like going, hey, yikes, that's a 10-2 team with a kind of a bad loss on the road there. But Tennessee kind of lacks those big time victories right now. I mean, they just do. And so obviously, if you don't look the part against Georgia, you're going to be written off to a certain extent, and you can't get blown out against them like you did last year, basically after the opening play.
Yeah, no doubt. And for their case too, I mean, 10-2, you can lose that one, win all the rest of your games. Is that enough to your point, when you start looking at resumes, did Tennessee do enough to get in? We'll cross that bridge when we get there. LSU at 3-1. Obviously, this Bama game is everything. At Florida is never easy. It's always a tough one. Vandy, like we said, is not an easy one, but it is in Death Valley. And Oklahoma, who's not looking very good, you get them in Death Valley. Feel good about LSU's chances if they can beat Bama. Maybe a good chance they can win out. But man, that's going to get really sticky if you got a lot of 7-1 teams in the end. But I'm not writing off LSU. I saw them in person. Look, it was a terrible second half at College Station, but it was their really worst half of football they've played all year. I think they'll bounce back. We'll get the best version of LSU against Alabama in 2 weeks, I feel like.
I think so too. And I think that they're just in such better spots with Blake Baker as their defensive coordinator. I was in the first half of that game, I'm thinking to myself, is Blake Baker about to win the Broyles Award or at least be in serious consideration for it? And then obviously the way that the last 23 minutes of that game played out, you're looking at that going, man, how could they not find answers against a mobile quarterback? And if you're looking ahead as an LSU fan to that Vandy game, you're thinking to yourself, buddy, is Diego Pavia about to pull a page out of the Marcel Reed playbook and be able to win that game? I wouldn't necessarily say that's going to be a similar matchup with the prep that LSU will probably have going into that. But you're right. It all comes down to this Bama game. You get through that, and all of a sudden you're seeing that there is a light at the end of this SEC tunnel, and it's fairly favorable for LSU. You haven't lost that Florida matchup since Joe Burrow threw the pick six in 2018. It's still, in my opinion, the loudest moment I have heard in person at a stadium when that happened in the Swamp. But yeah, this is such an intriguing slate for LSU, given the questions we've asked about them, given the Jekyll and Hyde nature that they've really shown throughout this season and the struggles that they've had in the fourth quarter running the football. Just kind of makes you wonder what we're going to get week to week from LSU.
Yeah, I've made the concession. You can't run the football. Just don't try. Just throw. That's all you are. You're an old Big 12 team. Just throw the football. That's who you are. On the flip side, Alabama, again, this game is everything for them. If they are able to find a way to win at LSU, you're 4-2 in the conference. But come on, Mercer, Oklahoma, and Auburn left. Like, you feel pretty good about Bama finishing strong. If they don't, Kalen DeBoer, don't unload everything in your office just yet. They might renege on that contract. But nonetheless, I mean, again, we talked about Tennessee and the Georgia game, everything to play for. And that one for LSU and Bama, this is kind of the same goes on both sides. Even though Bama's got the 2 losses already, if they win this one, a good chance to win out.
Yeah, I mean, that's the good news is I think we're talking more so about Bama's playoff chances versus LSU's SEC championship odds. Like that feels like what's more on the line for this game, considering that Alabama obviously has the 2 conference losses and LSU just has 1. But that is the good news if you're Alabama. If you find a way to win this game in Death Valley and all of a sudden 10-2 is on the table, you're thinking to yourself, okay, playoff berth. That is something that we can actually obtain. And we feel like we have been able to kind of withstand all of our midseason issues in this horrible month of October that's been. I do think that there are going to be some bad losses in the college football playoff field. And while I'm not predicting Alabama to win at LSU, I think LSU is going to end up winning that game. So I guess I'm saying that Alabama's playoff chances aren't as good as maybe like what 10-2 would indicate. But I do think that Alabama is really responsible for its own downfall this season. The discipline issues continue to mount. I mean, they had 85 penalty yards in that Mizzou game, in a game that they won going away, but still, it's just been discipline over and over again every single week with this team. And I think that's going to be their undoing. But yeah, if they get through LSU, we're having those conversations about Bama's playoff chances, not as much about their SEC championship chances because of the 2 conference losses. But I guess if you're a Bama fan, you're just holding on to hope that you can sneak in with an at-large berth.
So just to put a cap on SEC championship talk, I mean, you think the 2 teams we're going to see in Atlanta right here. I mean, if I'm handicapping today, Connor, I'm saying it's probably Georgia. I'd put Georgia in there because I'm never going to go against Kirby Smart, and it's one of A&M or Texas playing them. Is that where you would put your money?
I agree. Yes, I think it's Georgia, and I think it's the winner of Texas A&M Texas. That would be the most likely scenario. And if it's anything but that, I will be surprised. But then again, week to week in this conference, it's just been all over the place. The first time since 2007 that there won't be an undefeated team in the SEC going into the month of November. I mean, the fact that we're talking about just one SEC team left with an unbeaten record in conference play, and it's Texas A&M. Right. This year has thrown us all over the place, and it feels just like we're just on this wild goose chase to find a champion. And maybe it is shades of 2007 after LSU, of course, loses the regular season finale against Arkansas, wins the SEC championship, doesn't even feel like it's going to be playing in a national championship game, and then finds a way to do that, and then of course win the whole thing. So yeah, it's been an entertaining year nonetheless for those of us in this content business.
Yeah, and so and keep in mind, even if LSU were to win out, if A&M sitting there with one loss, A&M holds the head-to-head over LSU, so that can come into play, and that's where it gets really sticky because LSU they don't play Texas with Georgia, so they won't have a head-to-head over them. And I wonder if you're LSU, maybe you'd kind of like to be sitting there at 10-2, not go to Atlanta and lose to Georgia, and get ready for a first-round playoff home game, right? So there's a lot of different things that could happen here, but I think there's some teams saying we don't want to go to Atlanta and lose to Georgia, right?
Maybe it depends on. I think it depends on where your team is at, but from a competitive standpoint, if you get to Atlanta, you have a chance to compete for a first-round bye. And that's why they've still incentivized these conference championship games, because the ability to be able to get through to that next round and have another week of feeling like you're in contention for a national championship is going to be tremendously valuable. So yeah, there are probably certain teams where if they're sitting there at 11-1 and they feel like they're already going to the college football playoff and they don't really have as much to gain, yeah, maybe they would like to be able to say, it'd be great to not have to play in this game and to get a little bit healthier, get a little bit of extra rest, not have to play against one of the 4 or 5 best teams in all of college football, and just kind of get right going into the playoff, maybe host a playoff game and get to do that. But yeah, it's a crazy set of scenarios that still feel like they're going to unfold in this final month.
And real quick, I kind of touched on it. The 2 lost teams, just, with an outside chance, maybe not to win the, play for an SEC title, but get to the playoff. Ole Miss, you got to like their path with Arkansas, Georgia, Florida, Mississippi State. Again, they get Georgia at home, so that's, doable. Mizzou is the weird one. Like, they play nobody remaining. They play Oklahoma, South Carolina, Mississippi State, Arkansas. A chance to finish, but who's looking at that Mizzou team after just getting demolished by Alabama going, well, if they finish 10-2, we should put them in the playoff. I look at them and go, who's your best win? And I guess they could say Vandy, maybe Boston College, but that's a tough argument too.
Gordy, I think more likely for Mizzou, I think more likely than 10-2 is 6-6. I truly believe that. And that's not to say I think they're going 6-6. They're probably going to find a way to be a 7-5 or an 8-4 type team. But I just think that what we've seen from them offensively and the weaknesses that they've shown with a healthy Brady Cook or without a healthy Brady Cook, I think to me it is too difficult to map out any scenario in which they make the playoff, because already at 10-2 with 2 blowout losses, like even if they won out with that slate, you're still looking around and going, who have you beaten? Who in the world have you beaten that actually impresses us? And in these 2 marquee games in which you could have gotten that quality win, you got your doors blown off. So to me, Mizzou is not worth discussing in terms of a playoff contender.
Yeah, and I put Vandy and Florida in here. I probably should have put Arkansas as well, but those are all teams that have a non-conference loss too, so they can't even get to 10-2. The best you could do is 9-3. But I just making the case that if Vandy and Florida, the crazy thing, Florida, if they win the rest of their SC games, will be 4-2 and maybe in the conversation if all hell breaks loose around the rest of the conference. But I just wanted to put them in there because it's insane to even throw out the possibility that Billy Napier could be talking about maybe getting to Atlanta.
If Florida snaps a streak of 7 consecutive losses against AP top 25 teams, which I believe it's 7 I think it's 7. If they snap that streak by beating the likes of Georgia, Texas, LSU, who, as I just mentioned, Florida hasn't beaten them since 2018, and Ole Miss, if they do that, our conversations are so different.
Maybe you put them in. Maybe they deserve to be in at that point.
Throw them in there, man. If they handle the most difficult schedule in college football history by doing that, throw them in that college football playoff. Who wants to play Florida in the first round? Go to the Swamp and late December and see how you like that Florida foe.
Last thing, Connor, appreciate you taking some time. I had a friend sent me this earlier. This is it updated a projected playoff picture of what things could look like. And I feel like we have to keep bringing this up to college football fans and SEC fans to kind of set the tone here. This isn't, to me, in my opinion, they should have just did 1 through 12, Connor. The whole thing about, conference champ moves to the front of the line. We don't do that in basketball. We don't say, well, you won your conference, so you're automatically a 1 seed. Like we don't do that in college basketball yet. In football, they want to, we're going to champion the top 4 conference champions. So y'all move to the front of the line. Because I did a radio hit this morning. Somebody asked me, how many teams the SEC get in? I'm like, dude, stop thinking 6 SEC teams are getting the playoff. I don't think that's going to happen. But in this scenario, they have Oregon in as the Big Ten champ, Georgia in as the SEC champ, BYU in as the Big 12 champ, and Miami in as the ACC champ. That's your 4 seeds. And then as at-larges, they have Texas, Texas A&M, and Tennessee. And that's it. I mean, that's 4 SEC teams. They have Ohio State in, Penn State in, Notre Dame, Boise State, and Iowa State. Just looking at it off first glance, Connor, this is more reality. I just don't think, when everybody keeps saying 5, 6 SEC teams, we'll see what they do. I mean, the cards still have to fall where they fall, but I think this is more of a reality of what could happen.
4 is par, 3 is a bogey, 5 is a birdie. That's how you should think of this. If you want to handicap it in golf terms, 4 will be the standard number of 12-team playoff participants for the SEC. Okay. Anything less than that, it'll be deemed a disappointing year for the SEC. Anything more than that, and the SEC chance will be out in full force in November and into December. That's probably the best way to look at it moving forward. But, you talk about the conference championship games and, why it's a more complicated bracket to break down than just simply 1 through 12. I'm not saying I agree with this, but it's entirely because conference commissioners still have so much power in this sport and they want their conference championship games to have eyeballs. It's as simple as that. They want the eyeballs. They want the money. They want that showcase game for their conference. And there's a reason why they stagger these conference championship games as much as possible to try and make sure that they get a national audience. So that's, to me, why this field is such a complicated one to break down, because you look at that and you're like, BYU sitting there at number 4? Like, what are we talking about? Like, who's BYU faced? And you're like, wait a minute, Indiana's undefeated. In my unbiased opinion, should they have a spot in that 12-team playoff? If they're 11-1, yeah, they should have a spot in the college football playoff if they're 11-1. But you look at the models breakdown and you're kind of like, all right, well, Penn State, Oregon, Ohio State, they're going to get in over them. That's where this thing all gets really, really messy. I do find myself looking forward to the messiness, and I'm here to debate all of it. We can discuss this again in a few weeks, and it's probably going to be an entirely different conversation. Even as a guy that wasn't banging the drum saying we need the 12-team playoff, I'm certainly here for it and all the chaos it's creating.
Well, hopefully we've helped clear up some stuff for you folks out there who are super confused on how all this stuff is going to work. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch it. And Connor, nobody better to help us break it all down. I know you're one of the smarter brains out there when it comes to all this stuff and talking college football. So enjoy you taking some time, man. Let everybody know where they can find your stuff.
Yeah, I appreciate that, man. And I'm going to tell my wife that you call me one of the smarter brains in anything, especially for what I do for a living. But yeah, Saturday Down South podcast, wherever you get your podcast. Once you're finished listening to Locked On, listen to all things Saturday Down South podcast. And we have obviously tons and tons of content on SaturdayDownSouth.com. I always say our news team just does such a great job with keeping up on everything related, not just to the SEC, but everything in college football. It's a fantastic time of year. And I love helping people waste a morning, waste an afternoon, just being able to consume as much of our content as possible.
It's great stuff. Connor O'Gara, again, check him out Saturday Down South. Appreciate you guys for making us your first listen every day. And hey, for your second listen, check out some of our other great podcasts, including Locked On College Football. Spencer McLaughlin does a great job. That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On SEC. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow.